This is a reading from the notebooks by Maria Valtorta, 1945 to 1950. September 17th, 1947, to the Colossians. Jesus says, chapter 1, verse 23, "It is useless to receive baptism and the other sacraments except for confession on the verge of death, when it is sincere and honest, and anointing of the sick, unless you live by persevering, well-grounded and firm in faith, resolute in the hope of the gospel. Indeed, these gifts of infinite value turn against you for your condemnation, for more is asked of those whom more is given. For the gospel is life, for the sacraments are strength, for in Christianity everything is active, and woe to those who with so much life infused into them are lukewarm and indolent, vegetating and not working with the great powers which they have been given, so as to appear always holy, immaculate, and irreproachable before the Most High." Chapter 2, verse 12. "The animal man, for such is man deprived of grace, that is, just as he is when born of woman, in the eyes of God is like a dead man, whose corrupt body may not enter to contaminate the eternal temple, where the throne of God shines, and into whose corrupt body he who fills all creation with himself cannot come, omnipresent over all, that is, with power in inferior created things, with power, wisdom, and love in man, a superior creation. But it is not enough for God to have created you, the perfection of creation. He wants to dwell in you with his threefold perfection, possess you before giving himself for your possession eternally, enjoy you before you can enjoy him in heaven, and Christ, obeying the Father and love, thus became incarnate and immolated himself to make the water of baptism not a rite, but life. Christ does this. He grafts you into life, and baptism is the agent. Just as if it were possible, a surgeon taking a child dead at birth and joining the child to an active matrix were to make the baby alive. Baptism does the same with you. It takes you when dead. It immerses you in the wave, which is water, but in reality it is my blood. It is blood, my blood, and restores you alive with the life which is grace." Chapter 2, verse 20. "Consider the great freedom of the Christian, fortified by the life he has received." The apostle says, "If then you have died with Christ to the elements of the world, why do you subject yourselves to these precepts? Do not touch, do not taste, do not use, as if you were still living by the world. A great truth, which I said to my faithful ones, those who believe in me will cast out demons, drink poisons, touch serpents, step on scorpions, and pass through fire and water, and in the midst of wild beasts, and nothing will harm them, until I, life, so grant to robe them in martyrs' crimson." True Christians ought not to fear the world and its powers. The former and the latter set snares even in the most natural things, like enjoying food, fruit, a flower, a caress given or received, or affection, and good things, created by God so that man, his son, would find joy therein, turn into poisons, serpents, scorpions, water, fire, and wild beasts. Have the fullness of me in you, and without prohibiting for yourselves what God has granted you, just as he granted it to you, with justice, prudence, and temperance, and you will be superior to the snares of the demons and the senses. For I, who overcame death and sin, will strengthen you against the things which can become sins and death." September 19th, 1947. Jesus says, "Start at once to review the texts, to make them legible for others, because you cannot occupy yourself with them any longer, and they must do so now. You will soon receive a letter that you must believe in and yield to. When you get it, you will be convinced. Proceed so as to prepare what they request. As for the way you should act, I can only repeat what I have always told you: protection of the work, secrecy concerning the spokesman, the supernatural character of the work. Beginning with the first edition, you shall indicate the parts reserved for the public from the general work reserved for the clergy. Publication, to avoid manipulation, There already has been some, as I told you, but publication after the church is due nihil obstat. 2 copies of a document signed by the general, footnote 320, see notes 240 and 245, or the person delegated by him and by you, which, on behalf of the whole order, makes a commitment to protect the work entrusted to it and to your care, in addition to returning the manuscripts and a transcribed copy, which must remain in your house until the initial publication of the work. Afterwards, you may hand over the manuscripts too. I will give you the other instructions from time to time. It suffices to write these down to show them at the proper time and have them see that it is I who guide you and you obey. And the others should obey. The way things stand today, the general should feel no aversion or fear. If he goes on resisting, he brings me great pain. Therefore, with the matters which may cause him fear taken out of the way, he can draw up the document, and you and they can go forward as I will. September 22nd, 1947. I am correcting, but I cannot resolve to write to Father Berti. I am afraid of them. I have suffered too much on their account. Jesus persists like a trumpet blaring without respite. If only it were true, but who can trust any more? September 24th, 1947. Jesus says, always act as follows. I previously told you at St. Andrea di Compito, 321, see the notebooks 1944, note 312, but you don't remember. Use extraordinary means when you are denied ordinary means, but never neglect ordinary means when you can have them. May my compassion at your hunger, not satisfied by the men who ought to satisfy it, not lead you to the point of abuse. It is an extraordinary favor within the extraordinariness already covering and robing you. Be joyful and at peace, for it is additional proof of my love for you, and to always be so with justice. One day, in Palestine, I said, I feel compassion for these crowds. I do not want to send them back without food, so that they will not faint from exhaustion on the way, and I gave them food. But on another occasion I said, you seek me because of the bread you have eaten to the point of satiety, not because of the miracles you have seen. It was more comfortable to get bread and fish at no expense, but not right. Act so as always to merit my grace, which gives you food so that you will not languish, and your spirit the capacity to understand these words. Sing Panis Angelicus with your Azariah. I will listen to your song, and may whatever else I say to you remain written in your heart. September 25th, 1947. Jesus says, you have been asked whether the oil used by my disciples to heal the sick had an exclusive curative purpose. I have already spoken about this in the work, but I sympathize with those who do not find the exact point in such a vast work, and thus repeat. The oil had a curative power alone. Indeed, it did not even have that in a special way. It had the usual curative power of the oil, which in my time was widely used in the form of ointment, to be rubbed in or spread over the diseased areas, either alone or with resins and essences. The usual power, on its own, which was quite relative in certain serious illnesses that had already reached a lethal or chronic stage, precisely the ones which were presented to my disciples, because every treatment for them had been declared ineffective. It was not then the oil on its own that healed them, when applied by my disciples, but the power I had given them that healed. The oil was only the means used so that my power communicated to the apostles would not take on a form which my enemies and those of my disciples could denounce as demonic or magical. In that way, and in that way alone, the oil healed bodies. In that way, and in that way alone. It was the oil, until I instituted the sacrament of holy anointing. Then the holy oil, prepared according to the rules of the Mosaic liturgy, acquired the power to heal the wounds of the soul and to cancel out their sins too. The scars remaining after the absolution of sins, obtained after a sincere confession and through the merits of my sacrifice. 2 very different powers of the oil, for those sick in their members, and until the institution of the sacrament of anointing, to heal the diseases of the body, for the dying, close to judgment, to heal the soul before its encounter with God, the judge, and, if God should benignly accede to the requests of relatives to restore health to the body too, granting additional time in the world to acquire new merits, or simply merits, if the one who obtained physical health too through the sacrament had not previously acquired them. To conclude, the oil poured on the sick by the disciples was not a sacrament until after I instituted the sacrament, to be applied in the face of death, according to the manner taught by wisdom. Footnote 322. Exodus chapter 30, verses 22 to 23. September 30th, 1947. As I correct the typewritten pages and admire their stylistic beauty, Jesus says, "Observe, Maria, if I had given you just beautiful pages, in literary terms, I would not have given you anything. Nothing useful, nothing with real value. I would have given you some music, and one of those empty, light pieces of music, too, which caress the ear alone, but do not prompt select thoughts in those listening to them. For there is music which is prayer, instruction, and elevation to contemplation in the supernatural domain, music in whose notes there truly vibrates and shines forth not so much human genius, but the power of God, man's creator. Man's genius is only the means to witness to the power of God, who created him with intelligence and reason, in addition to spirit and flesh and blood. Human genius is simply the reply given to the supporters of evolutionary theories, maintaining that current man is just a beast that has evolved in a slow ascent from animality to humanity. Man's genius is simply the reply given to the deniers of creation, and therefore of God, the Creator, the heretics upholding the autogenesis of the universe. Human genius is simply the reply given to the atheists. Human genius is the confession that God exists, and that everything exists because He wills it. Light, life, elements, intellect, everything. But I am speaking about empty music. I would compare my pages to this if they were just the harmony of words and stylistic perfection. But there is wisdom in them, my wisdom. There is truth, my truth. There is charity in them, my charity. There is God then. That is why they have value. And woe to those who fail to seek and find therein this true value of theirs. I know the objection by many. Jesus spoke simply. In the parables, I spoke simply because I was addressing crowds of common folk. But when I spoke to cultured minds, Israelite or Roman or Greek, I spoke as was most appropriate for perfect wisdom. My words, moreover, in the versions of the evangelists, just two of whom were apostles, and if one observes closely, they are the two Gospels most clearly mirroring me. For Luke's, good stylistically, may be better termed the Gospel of my mother and my childhood, abundantly narrating details in relation thereto which the others do not narrate, rather than the Gospel of my public life, being more an echo of the others than a new light, is that of John, the perfect evangelist of the light, who is Christ the God-man. The versions, I was saying, of my words were greatly reduced by the evangelists to the point of being diminished to a skeleton, more an allusion than a version, a fact which deprives them of the stylistic form which I had given them. The teacher is in Matthew. See the Sermon on the Mount, the instructions for the apostles, the praise of the Baptist, and the rest of this chapter. The first episode in chapter 15, and the heavenly sign, divorce in chapter 19, and three other chapters, 22, 23, and 24. The teacher is in the luminous Gospel of John, above all, the apostle in love, fused in charity with his Christ, the light. Compare what this Gospel reveals about the power of Christ, the orator, to what is displayed in this regard by the essential scantiness of Mark's Gospel, precise in the episodes he had heard from Peter, but reduced to a minimum. And you will see whether I, the Word, used only a very humble style, or whether the power of the perfect Word did not often flash forth in me. Yes, it shines out in John, though quite reduced in a few episodes. Now, if to little John I have wanted to grant an increase in knowledge of me and my teaching, why should this make you incredulous and obstinate? Open up, open your intellects and hearts, and bless me for what I have given you. October the 7th, 1947. I saw most glorious Mary in heaven, alone in the azure of paradise, beautiful as in the Assumption and in all the visions of heaven. The voice of the Eternal Father and a ray of divine light in the great light of paradise pointed her out to me as the most blessed one, enveloping her in an indescribable splendor. The Eternal Father says, "This is the woman in whom all hope of salvation for the Church and humanity rests, in the mother of the Word who is the gospel." I got lost in ecstasy on contemplating her. October the 12th and the 13th of 1947. In Fatima with the pilgrims, prayers in the night, and in the basin strewn with lights, and Our Lady of Fatima at my side. In the morning, too, while Father Berti was here in the room, and Mary spurred me to say the Rosary a great deal, for the Pope, the clergy, peace, and Italy. The Rosary is the valid defense of the papacy, the Church, peace, and our country. She said that for this reason she had appeared in Rome, footnote 323, at the three fountains mentioned at length on December 31st, 1947, and to rouse the incredulous, the indifferent, the hostile, and those opposed to the supernatural, the incredulous in regard to the work, too, which is the glory of her Son, and in which there is salvation for many. October 15th, 1947, 10 a.m. Mary Most Holy said, "I grant my blessing, but I want fidelity to daily recitation of the Rosary." She blessed my rosaries, those of Marta, Eroma, Anna Maria, and Maria Teresa, without gestures, with her gaze and love. October 17th, 1947. Jesus says, "Listen, and may my infinite mercy be your peace." Peace, always. You will never touch the limit of this mercy of mine, because it is unlimited. But know this too, and may it be the word of an absolving priest for those deficiencies of yours over which you are afflicted. It is of use for you, but also for many others. In my infinite love for souls, I apply infinite diligence to use all that poor souls, or souls already on the way of perfection, give me, provided they love me to the extent they are able to, with their entire selves, with their capacities and relativeness, which they always seek to augment. There is no saint, though now in glory, though following the perfect way on earth, who has not introduced some elements of soil into his or her gold, even if they are minimal. Well then, I have taken up even these portions of persistent humanity in the just. My love has taken advantage of them and changed them from a dead weight into something useful for other souls. Yes, whereas men make use only of what is good and helpful for a type of work or an area of interest, and even in their affections love only the good parts of the beloved one, my love makes use of their deficiencies too. It takes up and transforms the most common elements in the ordinary life of a soul that loves it, and turns simple actions into meritorious actions. And it goes even further. It makes use of their very faults and weaknesses, sometimes their little lies, what is not perfect, but, however, not harmful to their neighbors, those small failings prompted by a complex set of impulses, comparable to the imprudent, playful acts of curiosity and boasting of a child, and uses them so that other souls will enter upon the way of goodness, thereby turning the imperfection committed by a soul that is unreflecting or has yielded for an instant into a means for good in relation to others. This act diminishes the imperfection and the debt to justice contracted by the soul on account of these imperfections, and at the same time it makes the soul that has committed them increase its love for me, with gratitude for my mercy, which does not repress them by unmasking them, but rather, when it sees that strength may come to others from their weakness, it goes along with them. My method in loving and saving takes on forms used by me alone, which few understand. It is then, when I avail myself of the faults of souls to fortify other souls, that I say to the soul that has committed them, "Has no one condemned you?" And when it replies, "No one, Lord," I say, "And I do not condemn you either. Go and sin no more." Ready to repeat it 70 times 7, for the faults of those loving souls generally flow from a misguided desire to lead others to love me. perhaps following the wrong paths, and they are later afflicted over this. But don't you know, souls of mine, that when there is no desire to offend me, but only to honor me, there is no sin? But don't you know, my sweet souls, that the humility of feeling incapable repentance over having done wrong out of a desire to do good properly, and the love blazing up more forcefully in you after one of these childish falls, brings me more glory and do more good to souls than if you never committed them? It seems like a paradox, but it's true. Be at peace. Be at peace. My love and yours cleanse you of all the dust which may try to cover your gold, your desire to love me perfectly. Be at peace. And instead of the Eucharist, which was not brought to you, take my word. It is nourishment, life, health, and joy. It is I who communicate myself to you with my infinite means. Rest on the one who loves you. October 19th, 1947. After having devoted all of yesterday to a vision of the area of Rome extending from St. Paul's Basilica to the countryside running towards the south of the city, an area over which I saw roses falling on May the 5th, 1947, footnote 324. See the entry for that date. With the Appian Way on my left, one of the few Roman localities I remember clearly because I visited it during my only stay in Rome, lasting 3 days in October 1920, when I went to visit St. Paul's tomb, footnote 325. See the section entitled In Calabria, in part 4 of the autobiography. And the Tiber on my right, heading towards the sea, and I don't know why I should have been mindful of this section of Roman countryside throughout the day. At nightfall, Our Lady also came to bring me blessedness, and up to that point there was nothing sufficiently extraordinary to prompt me to write these words. But after I had become sated with the joy of seeing Mary, there appeared the Archangel Michael, always very imposing, I would say frighteningly handsome, with his blazing sword in his right hand. And here the vision for me alone came to an end, and it became universal communication. The Archangel, pointing to Our Lady, thoroughly lovely in her virginal humility, her gracefulness as an eternal girl is indescribable, cried out, "Set the weapon that is Mary against the great serpent that is advancing." What a powerful voice! It shook the atmosphere like the sound of a harmonious thunderclap. Our Lady lowered her head, looking at the earth with boundless compassion, and the Archangel powerfully cried out 3 times. The defending Archangel was very severe and imperious. After the 3rd cry, and a pause following it, he prostrated himself before Mary, venerating her by saying, "You alone are a defense. You alone are victorious. You alone are the hope of salvation against satanic venom. Mother of the one who is without equal, I greet you, my queen." He was still prostrate when the Archangel Saint Gabriel came racing down in flight from the heavens to the earth, bringing with him a light compared to which Saint Michael's splendor was tenuous. He was holding a golden thurible, smoking with incense in his hands. His appearance, his hair and clothing were golden and white, was spiritual, though, in order to be visible to my humanity, it was weighed down with a human exterior. His figure gave off light, the joyful light of paradise, singing, for the voice of Saint Gabriel is a very soft, indescribable sound. He flew around Mary, incensing her with his thurible, saying, "Hail Mary, Queen of the angels, salvation of men, love of the triune God, after God who is like you, Mary. Hail, most glorious Queen in heaven, medicine for all the illnesses killing spirits and extinguishing faith, hope, and charity in men. Hail Mary." What a blessed night! For a long time I remained contemplating the glorious Virgin and the 2 shining, very different archangels, until a peaceful sleep, after so many nights of acute agonies, took me, lasting until the morning, when I reawakened, and everything freshly came to my mind again, and my heart was filled with the same joy as when I was seeing. A disturbing thought was mixed, though, with my inner spiritual joy, the words of Saint Michael, "Set the weapon that is Mary against the serpent that is advancing." Words with a connection to many others, which caused me fear concerning the Church of Rome, and us poor and very weak Christians of the 20th century, to provide the most exact possible indication of the lofty place between heaven and earth where I saw the vision unfolding of the angelic veneration of the Blessed Virgin Mary, I shall state that the tomb of Cecilia Metella was at my back, that is, behind me. To the left, my back was turned towards Rome. To the northeast of the place, while on my right, I saw the Tiber flowing slowly towards the sea. Today was the third day after having asked Our Lady of the three fountains in which I have received the physical grace I begged for. October 23rd, 1947. Jesus says, "You had your holy year in your 50th year. You had me in a way only you know." Footnote 326. On March 16th, 1947, in connection with March 14th, her 50th birthday. And you are remaining in this Jubilee year of yours until it turns into your eternal century of heavenly peace. But the holy year that will come must be marked by a special character, the Marian character. The extraordinary holy year was celebrated for the 19th centennial of my Passion. Infinite wisdom would love there to be a celebration of this other centennial as well, of the glorious assumption of my mother into heaven, and to have this celebration give a special character to the next holy year. Footnote 327. In 1933, under Pope Pius XI, the extraordinary holy year of the Redemption had been celebrated. In 1950, an ordinary holy year, Pope Pius XII would define as a dogma of the faith the Assumption of Our Lady in soul and body into the glory of heaven. Infinite wisdom would love to have this duty, this need, and this far-sightedness be felt as regards providing a note of Marian triumph, and thus a stimulus for devotion to Mary, your salvation, in this terrible conclusion to this terrible century, in which the complete opening of the seven seals may take place. Footnote 328, Revelations chapter 5 and 6. As God's punishment in the next holy year, for too many centuries now, Christendom has been awaiting this triumphal proclamation of the Virgin Mother, taken up into heaven by God, to be a joy for God, whose living temple on earth she was, and the queen of the heavenly choirs, and the people of the saints. Many of the seals have in reality already been opened, but woe if they were all opened, or should come to be. Hasten the hour of the triumph of the woman, foundress of the lineage of those marked with the sign of the servants of God, the chosen whose dwelling is heaven. Hasten the hour of Mary's triumph over Satan, the world, matter, and death, overcome by us twice, overcome in her as a creature too, in her not knowing the spiritual death of sin, in addition to not knowing death in her flesh, which was not corrupted and lives here. Hasten the hour of Mary's triumph. Let the men, women, and children of the one holy, Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman Church join the angels, headed by Michael, so that the dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 accursed diadems, the 7 seductions, footnote 329, Revelations chapter 12, verse 3, will be cast down for a certain period, and Christendom will have time to gather together and fortify itself in charity and faith, and close ranks as a defense for the final battle. Woe if the woman dressed in purple and scarlet, where the unclean beast with blasphemous names sets his throne, were to be proclaimed queen before the queen of the angels, and men is proclaimed with infallible words. The woman dressed in sunlight, whose feet tread upon the moon, and whose head is crowned with stars. Footnote 330, Revelations chapter 12, verse 1, and chapter 17, verses 3 to 4. There cannot be a second redemption carried out by me, Christ, but there can still be one to save a greater number of spirits from the coils of hell, that of glorious Mary. In devotion to her lies the secret of the last redemption. If they hear me in the words of the work, you know who you should communicate these other words to.